we come along. I want to welcome you to Webinars for Busy Lawyers. My name is Laura. I'm one of the law practice advisors for Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, Massachusetts LOMAP. This is one of the services that we provide for Massachusetts legal professionals. We also do free and confidential consultations, programming, a number of different things. If you would like to learn more, our website is masslomap.org. Webinars for Busy Lawyers is one of my favorite things that our group does because it gives attendees practical tips to take away with you. We recognize that lawyers have such busy lives, and these are about important topics that are very relevant in lawyers' lives. We bring in experts on these topics, and then you can come away with tips to implement in your life. I am especially delighted to talk about today's speaker. She is not only someone that I hold in very high esteem and regard, she's also a friend. Danielle Hall is absolutely amazing. And she, by the way, is one of the perfect people to talk about this subject because she wears so many hats and she does all of them well. To give you a little bit of sense of her background, Danielle Hall serves as the executive director for the Kansas Lawyers Assistance Program. In addition to overseeing daily operations, she administers a variety of programs for lawyers and law students who need assistance due to a substance abuse, mental health, or law practice management related issue. Prior to her appointment in 2019, Danielle worked at the Kansas office of the disciplinary administrator, where in addition to prosecuting attorney misconduct cases, she coordinated the attorney diversion program. As part of the program, she provided training to lawyers in the areas of law practice management and technology and assisted lawyers in overcoming stress and burnout. Danielle is a member of the policy committee for the Institute for Wellbeing in the Law and is also a member of the executive committee for the Kansas Lawyer Wellbeing Task Force. She serves as co-chair of the Kansas Women Attorneys Association Minority Women in the Profession, is a member of the Kansas Bar Association Law Practice Management and Ethics Advisory Committees, is a regular contributor to the Kansas Bar Association Law Practice Management and Technology blog. She's also an active member in the ABA Law Practice Division, having served on a number of committees. She received her BA from Washburn and her JD from Washburn School of Law. And even with all of that said, that is just an inkling to give you an idea of all that Danielle does. As we were just talking a little bit before, her organization covers a huge depth of issues, at huge depth and breadth. She, in addition to running daily operations, works with clients, updates their blogs. So for those of you that are joining us today and really worried about feeling overwhelmed, trying to balance on your workload, thinking how can you set boundaries, this is a presenter who really has been in your shoes and knows what you're going through. Before I turn it over to Danielle, I just want to address some common questions. The first is that, yes, this is being recorded, and afterwards the recording and a PDF of the materials will be sent to attendees, so don't feel that you have to write all the notes down right off. If you have a friend who was unable to attend today, we will have this available for on-demand later. Please address your questions in the chat. We will get to as many of those as we can at the end. And with that said, Danielle, we are delighted to have you with us, and we look forward to talking and hearing you tell us about setting boundaries.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura. I am so excited to be with you and your group today. As we were discussing prior to launching the webinar, this topic is something that is near and dear to my own heart. Before I go any further, I will say I am a work in progress. And this is something that I have been working on, setting boundaries over the course of the last few years. It was a topic that really came to my mind and in front of my face consistently, so to speak, when I was with my Office of the Disciplinary Administrator, some people call it Office of Lawyer Regulation, when I was working with lawyers who were going through the disciplinary process. One thing that I often saw with those that were on diversion is that we would consistently have conversations about stress. We'd have conversations about burnout, And then amidst those conversations, we would also talk about the fact that some of that was created by the fact that we didn't have boundaries in place. So it was something that really came to my attention as an area, I think culturally as a profession, that we need to start working on. And that's why I'm here today to talk to you about this. So whenever I present, I like to give you the agenda of where it is that I'm going to go in my time that I have with you today. So we're going to talk a little bit about work-life balance, and I will tell you now, I don't like that term, and I will tell you why and what I call it instead. But we're going to talk about what is it, and is it actually attainable? Because we hear a lot about work-life balance, but I think as lawyers, we feel like this isn't for us because of the things that we do in the nature of the profession and our jobs. We'll also talk about professional boundaries, identifying what are they and what do they really look like for us as lawyers? And if we institute them, how can it help us in increasing our overall well-being? And then lastly, we're going to talk about how this all comes together to help you increase your productivity and have a better work-life balance by setting those boundaries. So let's start with work-life balance then. So if you were to Google this today, you would see that the common definition, it talks about having balance between time allocated for work and time allocated for all other aspects of our life. I know that sounds crazy, right? All other aspects of our life. Because for some of us, we're taught in law school, we have the lawyer hat on and it's on 24/7 and we don't get to take it off. And I feel like we have taken that concept of what it means to be a lawyer and have just applied it to every aspect of our life. And so sometimes it feels like you are the job rather than having that additional things beyond the job in your life that really makes you a person. So we want to take a look at, what does it mean to have work-life balance? Well, here's the thing though, okay? So balance, I told you, I don't like that terminology. The reason being is those of us that are perfectionists, I fall into this camp, okay? I would get balance as 50-50. Man, that to me seems really hard to attain, especially in the work that I do. It seems hard when I was a practicing lawyer and I did litigation for a couple of years. That seemed just like a really hard thing. So when I'm like, okay, 50-50, this is hard, it's not attainable, I think to myself, then it's not a thing. I'm not even going to try to do it because it's not attainable. So what I have had to accept over the last few years is that instead of calling it balance, for me, it works to call it work-life harmony. And by harmony, to me, in my mind, that means I don't always every day 24/7 have to have the 50-50 balance. My work-life harmony can ebb and it can flow and it can change. And so last night, I had to work into the evening to get an article done for an organization. And I know that because I had to do that last night, I had to do it on Monday. I worked a little bit on Sunday and I worked a little bit on Saturday. And I know you're thinking to yourself, then why is she here talking to me about boundaries if she's working on the weekends and in the evenings? I don't do it all of the time. I know because I had to put in that time the last few days, I need to have an opportunity to give myself back that time so then I can create that work-life harmony. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through instituting the process of instituting boundaries, is how is that going to play into your calendar and into your work-life harmony? So I put a few statements up here, a few things for you to consider and think about. I'm not going to read them all on the screen for you, but I'm pretty sure that all of you have probably had similar thoughts. I think I was saying on Sunday, I have no control over my time right now. I know last week I was telling myself, my gosh, I'm multitasking so much. I told Laura when we began, I was answering phones one day. I was doing stuff on our website, trying to get that done. And then on top of that, working with clients. So I was multitasking. And so we might have this sense of these feelings or these thoughts that are running through our mind on a regular basis. The interesting thing about all of this, though, especially when we start talking about our calendar and our control over our schedules, is that what we know is that if we continue to operate like that, it's especially harmful to our well-being. The research supports this. When we have a lack of that sense of control, it breeds grounds for depressions and other mental health concerns. But the flip side is also true, that research confirms for us that environments that really help us have that sense of control, it's optimal for our own well-being. So given that the research is out there, the National Task Force on Lawyer Wellbeing, which is now changed to the Institute for Wellbeing in the Law, they are now a 501(c)(3). They put out a report, though, in 2017, and it's the Path to Lawyer Wellbeing. And in this report, you will see passages that talk about this concept of a sense of control. And really what the task force urged all of us, all of the stakeholders, meaning lawyers, law schools, judges, malpractice insurance providers, regulators, lab programs, you name it. If there was a stakeholder in the profession itself, there is a recommendation that we begin to change the cultural structure, that we begin looking at what we call our organizational norms, and we modify all of that to increase our overall sense of well-being. And if we don't do that, so if we don't do that as a culture, and we don't do that personally in our own kind of sphere that we live and work in, that individual lawyer may have some consequences, because the research also supports that if we don't support good work-life harmony, we will experience things like fatigue, lost time, whether that's lost time with family, with friends, with yourself. Increased expectations. We begin to create those things when we don't have the ability to say no to people. Not having a good sense of work-life boundaries or work-life harmony and instituting those boundaries can also put it at risk for physical health issues, for mental health concerns. And then, I mentioned that I saw when I was working with our Office of the Disciplinary Administrator that there is this circular pattern between things like wellness, things like law practice management, and then ethical violations. And I often saw that circular pattern. So we want to take care of this issue so that way we can ward off some of these consequences. That National Task Force report pointed out that one has to be a healthy lawyer to be a competent lawyer. There's been some recent discussion about, does this negatively talk about mental health and well-being? That was not the original intent. The original intent, if you think about productivity as it relates to your physical health and your mental well-being, we can see that there's a connection there. When we're tired, when we're just feeling really stressed, we're probably not operating at our optimal prime. So this was really meant as a notice to us as to why it is important that we institute self-care, we institute good coping mechanisms, and we institute things like boundaries to help us create that work-life harmony. So how do we get there then? So 1, set boundaries. 2, we're going to establish a routine once those boundaries are set, and then we're going to attempt to minimize that distraction to increase productivity. The reason why I also add in there the establishing the routine and minimizing the distraction is because if we have boundaries in place, we should naturally have the ability to do the other 2 things, thereby increasing our productivity. If we increase productivity, we have space on our calendar, which means we can begin to focus on ourselves, our self-care, and have good, really work-life harmony. So setting those boundaries. So what do our professional boundaries look like? Well, I like to look at other boundary lines, things like property lines that tells me where I can go, where I can't go, things like roads that tells me what lane I need to be driving in. I teach a set of students all the time, and they always like to say, stay in your lane, right? Okay, so that is the area in which I can operate in. Sports, same kind of thing. It sets the area of play. And then personal relationships. I like to say this is my stuff I'm not going to put up with. My husband would laugh about that if he heard that. But if we take these concepts of boundaries in other areas of our lives and we begin to look at them from the sense of professional boundaries, the same rules apply. So 1, they will clearly establish our limits to allow for these safe connections with our clients. It's the ability to be friendly, but not be friends, because there is a difference there. It's the ability to also know where you end and where that client begins. And then it gives us a clear understanding of our role, but it also gives a clear understanding to the client of what their role is in that particular relationship. We can create boundaries in a lot of different ways. And sometimes boundaries are created for us. Things like our rules of professional conduct. For instance, if we look at model rule 1.4 on communication, we know that that tells us that we can't reveal information relating to the representation of a client. Right there's a boundary marker. I have to keep that stuff to myself. As the client, I have to keep it, as the lawyer, I have to keep it confidential. There's things in there about fees, how that's handled. So we already have some boundary markers already put into place for us. But on top of that, things like advisory opinions from the American Bar Association, from your state bar association, also give us some guidelines. But our workplaces are opportunities to put in boundary policies as well. And then, of course, the individual always has the opportunity to put that boundary in place. And those boundaries will protect you as a lawyer, and it will also protect the client. That's a thing to think about, that you're not just protecting yourself in the relationship, but you're also protecting the client. So 2 categories that I want you to consider going forward with instituting boundaries is 1, your client boundaries, and these are the expectations regarding your representation. And then your own self boundaries, because we have to put some boundaries in place for ourselves as well. And this is the promise that we make to ourselves about how we choose to use our time. A good area to start with your clients is communication. Thinking about, what are you going to use to communicate? How often are you going to communicate? When should a client expect communication? And then the other side of that is those boundaries are not just for you, they're for the client. So how long do you expect for it to take for you to get a response from the client as well? So these are all things that you can think about and questions you can ask yourself about that communication in order to make a determination of where your personal boundary lines are. For some of you, your firms may have policies in place that can help you answer these questions. And if not, we'll talk a little bit at the end about why it's important that upper management really think about these things as well. But when we look at methods of communication now, we've got things like letters, phone calls, emails. I know lawyers that are using text messages. Of course, we have the client portals now. It seems like there's a lot of ways to communicate that's out there. The interesting thing is that in the 2019 ABA Tech Report, they asked the question of whether or not we feel like technology has made our work-life balance better. So mind you, this is pre-pandemic questioning. And the answer to that question was yes. 61% said yes, technology has made my work-life balance better. If I think about over the course, though, of the pandemic, and those of us who were working remotely, working from home, home became work, work became home, did we maybe start to utilize that technology more often than we should have, and it created an imbalance in our work-life harmony? I know for me to step away at the end of the day and walk away from that computer, I have to literally shut the laptop to give myself, my brain, that physical indicator that I am done for the end of the day. That's a boundary line. I have a specific time that I have put on myself that I need to do that. I think technology, because I'm a firm believer in technology, right? I talk to lawyers all the time about using technology. It most certainly can help you. It can help you be a better practitioner, practice more efficiently, assist you in your representation. But we also have to have balance with that technology to ensure that we are not crossing those boundary lines, especially with respect to communication. Because if you think about it nowadays, the way that we communicate, it's instant. It's informal oftentimes. I say that we live in this Amazon Prime world. You know, we can order stuff and get it within 2 days. Amazon even has the ability to get it to you within 24 hours now. Then there's the grocery delivery that you can get within a couple of hours. So we live in this Amazon Prime world. Unfortunately, what has resulted is that with this instant communication, we've created all these false expectations that the person is going to immediately respond to me because of the immediacy of the message. So that's why it's important that you establish when and how you are going to communicate. And then even appointments and meetings, you know, before we were talking about, are you going to do the schedule? Are you going to do a random pop-it? Are you going to allow that? Or are you going to tell the client, please call first before you show up? Because one, I might not physically be here, but to ensure that you can control that with some mechanism. Zoom meetings are our thing now, right? We're on Zoom right now. Are we going to allow ourselves to schedule back to back to back Zoom meetings? It's not a good thing. It's not good for your productivity and your focus. So we need to be thinking about, with even our appointments and meetings, the when and how. The other important thing, especially with clients, is defining what is actually an emergency. You have to define that as the lawyer, and then you have to effectively communicate that with the client because they have to understand it. So you need to think about that. And there was an article, and it was put out in the ABA magazine, and it was focused on young lawyers. And thinking about what constitutes an emergency. But I even think for those of us that have been longstanding practitioners, it's a good reminder that at some point the courts close, that at some point there's not going to be much that you can do in particular hours of the day. And so thinking about how are you going to handle those situations on the front end rather than at that time. You have a ton of tools in front of you to set these boundaries. You have things like your attorney-client contract. If you do a welcome packet, in the initial meeting, we should have some discussions with our clients about these issues. And then, of course, we have our firm policies and procedures to fall back on. So you have the mechanisms, and I would advise you to take a look at your attorney-client agreements and determine, are there things in there about when I will answer emails? Are there things about who to contact with specific questions? Because that is a great tool for you to, when necessary, it's signed, you can pull it out. And if you need to, you can remind the client about what was in there as far as your boundaries are concerned. So in addition to the client boundaries, we also want to have some self-boundaries in place, promises to ourselves about how we use our time. So will we work after hours? Will we take work home on the weekends? Will we go on a vacation? And please do. I think mental health days are important when we are just like, oh, I need a day, but so are extended vacations. The research is out there to show us that we spend so much time on vacation on the front end, worrying about what we left behind, and so much time on the back end worrying about what we're going to come back to, that we really truly only get a few days in between that time where we really get to relax, refresh, and refocus and give our brain a little bit of a break to then come back and work at a high level of productivity. So please take your vacations. I tell my lawyers all the time in Kansas who tell me I can't take a vacation. I say, call me. And then you and I collectively will figure out how you can take a vacation, because I know you can. Think about when you're going to check your email. Think about your calendar. Are you going to give yourself time on your calendar to work on things that you need to work on? If we can do that, if we can put those boundaries in place, that puts us in a better position to start establishing a routine, which research shows us that routines are good for our mental health and our well-being. When we work on establishing a routine, what we want to do is we want to have things like written schedules to help us better manage stress. Setting times for single tasks, like responding to email. When are you going to do it? And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about email. When's the best time to do it? I'm going to tell you now, don't do it first thing in the morning. Making sure we set aside to take a lunch. Make sure that if you want to exercise, put it on your calendar because you're more likely to do it. For those of us that are working from home, and I think I read your state wellbeing task force statement on the future of where we're headed in the practice now that we see a light at the end of the tunnel for the pandemic, and the recommendation to continue to allow flexibility. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. And so working from home might not go away from some of you. So routines can be especially important when working from home, ensuring that you are taking that lunch break. The other thing with boundaries when we're working from home is ensuring we have a separation from our workspace and our life space. You want to have some space there. So if you are still working, in the kitchen, don't eat lunch in there. Go eat lunch somewhere else. At the end of the day, clean up your space, close your laptop, put your stuff away to indicate to yourself and your brain that the day is done. If we can establish a routine, the next step, institute boundaries, establish a routine, start minimizing that distraction. Okay, I want to briefly, real quickly, throw out the concept of deep work and shallow work. Cal Newport, he has a book on this. I highly recommend reading it because there really is parallels to the work that we do as lawyers with deep work and shallow work. So shallow work is that work that doesn't take a lot of time. It adds no new value. It's that rapid response communication. Deep work, on the other hand, are those things like motions, briefs, legal research, preparing for trial, preparing for deposition, all the stuff that really pushes us cognitively. And the great thing about deep work is it also can help us build new skill sets. The cognitive switching we do in a given day, though, that can really drain our time and it can drain our energy. We will find that if we have these distractions, then we are spending more time and we are spending more energy on whatever that deep work project is that we're attempting to work on. Once again, we go back to boundaries. What are your boundaries going to be with distractions throughout the day? If you have something that you absolutely need to work on, are you going to say, I'm going to block out time on my calendar and I'm going to set some boundary lines on my calendar for this is the time I'm going to work on this particular thing? Because what you will find is that you will produce a better product and you will get it done quicker. Our devices, they don't help. This is horrible. I got two sitting right here within an arm's length. There's been a ton of studies on this. The closer we have these things to us, there was a research done by Career Builder, and I think it was 2016. The closer we have these things to us, the more distracted we are. So if you find that you are just constantly distracted by your phone and you're working on something, put it in a desk drawer or put it in a completely different room if you can, because it'll help. A couple of things with time management stuff, because I think this is important. If we can institute boundaries with our calendar and our time, we can more effectively put into place time management techniques. So things like calendar blocking, which I've already talked about, that's when we take a block of time in our calendar and we designate it to one thing. Are things like the Pomodoro Technique, because I will be honest with you, it's really scary for lawyers to do calendar blocking because you're making the promise that during that time, you're not going to do anything else other than what is on that calendar. And that can be scary. They say with calendar blocking, we should do our whole day, block it out. Our whole week, we should block it out. You have a block of time to handle chaos, though. Maybe that's from like 3 to 4 or 3 to 5, but your whole day is blocked out. And that can be scary. The Pomodoro technique, on the other hand, is I have a deep work project that I need to do. So I'm going to set a little timer for 25 minutes and I'm going to focus for 25 minutes just on that one thing. I'm going to put up my bubble, my boundary, nobody bother me. And then after 25 minutes, I take a 5-minute break. And then after like 4 of those 25 minutes and 5-minute breaks, I'm going to take a longer break. And during that break time, that's when I deal with the distractions. That's also when I get up and move and I take a step away from my laptop and my computer. You know, I mentioned email, and I want to go back to that real briefly. The reason why I block out the first hour of my day with calendar blocking and I don't answer email from 8 to 9 in the morning is because I end up being responsive for the whole rest of the day to everybody else's problems, rather than starting my day off getting focused, getting organized, or maybe working on something that I know I can get done within that hour. There is something to not answering email first thing in the morning. And I know you're going to tell me there are times where you can't do that and you have to watch the email. Trust me, I've heard from litigators. I've heard some scary stories about offers and settlements and you have an hour to respond to this. Remember, work-life harmony, ebbs and flows. So during that time, yeah, you got to be flexible. Maybe I'm looking at it from 8 to 9, but on the other days where I don't have those situations occurring, I'm going to stick to my boundary of first thing in the morning, not responding to email. What you will find is that if you do this, you should have the ability to have increased productivity. I'm telling you, it works because you set those boundaries, you own your own calendar and your own time, which makes you more available to determine what it is you need to work on and what it is you need to get done. And you get the things you need to get done during that time period. And then you have time for other things like self-care, like relaxation, like doing things that bring enjoyment to your life. So I really want you to think about this and what your boundaries are. Do you have boundaries? And if you do have boundaries, do you actually stick to your boundaries? Because that's another tough thing too. Okay. My final thoughts on this is I want to tell you, be okay with saying no. I'm guilty. I have a really hard time saying no to people. And so I have to remind myself of this. When I was a young lawyer, I wanted to say yes to everything because I wanted that opportunity. I wanted to network. But it took my husband to tell me, at some point you got to make a choice in your career when you are there. And that is no longer the thing you have to do because you're trying to make it. I can now be selective. And so I need to make sure that I am being selective in the things that I'm doing. Even if you are a young lawyer, though, it is a good habit to set now of saying no to other people. So you don't end up like myself and 12 years later saying, what was I thinking, not saying no, and learning that skill set early on. So it's okay to say no. Prioritize your self-care. It's extremely important. And when you start thinking about boundaries, if you are a managing partner, consider instituting firm-wide policies that cultivate that sense of control that gives the employees the ability to put boundaries in place. There's a firm in my state, and on Friday afternoons, they say nothing good comes on a Friday afternoon, and there's nothing you can really do about things on a Friday afternoon. And so to the outside, the office is closed at noon. There are still assistants there that are taking phone calls if necessary, and they know what is emergency and what is not an emergency, but the lawyers are still there working, even though the office is closed to the public, because that gives them the time to get caught up and gives them the time to look forward in the week ahead. And so that's a firm-wide policy and a good one that is a prime example of cultivating that culture that will allow people to put boundaries in place. And then I'm here to tell you work-life balance, harmony. It is actually possible. And hopefully the tips I have given you today will help you get there in establishing that work-life harmony for you. All right. So that's what I have to talk about this. And so I'm curious whether or not there are any questions.
Danielle, that was amazing. First of all, I encourage people to have questions, put them in the chat. I want to say that this was incredible how you talked about boundaries as being not only good for the lawyer, but for the client, how you need professional boundaries, how you need personal boundaries, your tips about blocking out the calendar, Pomodoro, committing to short spurts where you'll get tasks done in that time, I think is so important. We have a question come in that says, many people are solo and small firm. Do you have tips for communicating boundaries to supervisors?
I do. So, I know that, I've worked with lawyers before that are like, there's this unspoken rule that we're all supposed to come in on Saturday, and nobody wants to be the one to go into the supervisors and say, is this really a rule, or is this really a thing? Or if not, can we establish some boundaries here and some policies? My recommendation that I give is that, one, have the courage to do it. And two, I am always about fact-based analysis and decision-making. And there are things out there that support that this is a good thing for the firm. One thing I often send folks is that 2017 report, because it talks about this in it, and we've got the numbers to back it up, that if we institute policies like these that can help establish that work-life balance, it creates better workers and more gets done. And the representation to the client is better. And so if you can go in with the recommendation to supervisors backing up why you are making that recommendation, I think that can be helpful in facilitating that discussion with the supervisor.
That is fantastic. Very, very helpful. This one is along a similar idea. Just if you happen to have additional thoughts on this spin of it, a person asked how best to promote these ideas in the organizations when the leadership and supervisors are particularly not good at modeling or supporting these practices. So it sounds like you were saying before, use fact-based, come and say about how it will be better productivity, point to surveys. Any other tips you would do for when you have supervisors particularly poor at modeling practices like this?
Yeah, I would say the other recommendation that I have is when the supervisors are poor at modeling it, but you do have people that have figured it out, to celebrate that and to vocalize that. and to have the discussions more on why that is a good thing. Let's stop wearing the badge of honor on our sleeve that I and I did this today, but I was making a point, let's stop wearing that badge of honor of, oh my goodness, I worked for 14 hours today, because that's typically the commentary that comes out from lawyers. And I think if we can start making those cultural changes by saying, oh, I read a book last night. Slowly, it's a slow process, you guys. Slowly we can facilitate some change, but it's going to take some courage on some parts of some lawyers to be out there and be vocal. And I think the more you're vocal in the firm with giving people positive feedback when you do hear something that supports self-care and wellness and all of that, that'll help.
That's very insightful. Another attendee writes, thank you so much for the presentation. What would you say is a reasonable boundary to set with new clients regarding response time? This was one of the parts of your presentation that I thought was so important, and a lot of lawyers don't think about, is setting expectations with the client right off in the fee agreement, in the initial meetings. What are some thoughts about reasonable boundaries there?
Right. And I think oftentimes when we think about that, of course, our professional responsibilities come into play. I mean, those are constantly always in the back of our mind. And so we think about this and what is an effective and ethical response time. I tell people, look, you get that email at 7, if that's your cutoff marker, you don't have to respond to it at 7:01. You don't have to respond to it at 10 o'clock at night. I think you have to find what you are comfortable with, because the rule says reasonable, right? Reasonable, responding reasonably in a reasonable amount of time. A lot of lawyers that I work with, they're like, there's the 24-hour rule. But if you have that and you institute that, you got to think beyond that, because does that 24-hour rule apply on the weekends? Because if it doesn't, then let's say that. Maybe let's give the client an ability to leave the message over the weekend, and if it truly is an emergency, here's the number you call, leave a message, and then I'll call you back. But then it goes back to having that conversation with the client about what actually constitutes an emergency, when it is okay to call and leave the weekend emergency message.
Wonderful response. Just to add to that, I might encourage the clients to, if you are using a practice management system that has a client portal, to check in there first, because from what I hear from lawyers, a lot of the questions, if the client's logged into their portal, they could find the current status of the case, they could find the documents, which might answer maybe half the questions you're calling about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's an excellent point. If you have that technology, utilize it to assist in having the ability to establish those boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, this person asks, how do you handle friends, and that's in quotes, who ask for legal advice? I know this is the thing with a lot of lawyers, that they have friends of friends, they have family, ask for legal advice. So I'll have you both ask it and answer in general, and then also with your ethics past disciplinary cap on, would you go into some of the dangers of also working for friends and family in areas outside your competence?
Absolutely. It goes back to having that ability to say no and feeling comfortable with saying no. And I know that's really hard with friends and family. I've been fortunate enough that I have found myself in positions in jobs where I could say, I can't give you legal advice because of my job. So that's been really helpful for me. And not everybody has that privilege when you are working in a firm and representing clients. I think you have to ask yourselves, one, are you competent enough to answer those questions? Because if you're not, being comfortable with saying, I'm sorry, that's not my area of practice. I know I'm a lawyer, but we don't know everything. Here's maybe somebody you could call though. Sometimes it makes it easier to say no when we have the ability to offer somebody the alternative. It makes that blow to the person saying no feel a little bit better when you make that blow. But family and friends, that stuff, now we've got boundaries, right? Like going like this, and it can get really sticky, and it can put you in a position to where you're questioning, am I still representing this client ethically, so to speak? So you got to walk a thin line with that. And my biggest advice is being comfortable with just saying no. People will get over it. Truly, they will get over it.
I think that's a great advice. Learning to say no, learning to refer if you can. I would also just add to remember that on your list of things that help us in the profession set boundaries, you listed the client attorney fee agreement.
Yes.
So if you don't have that written scope of agreement, what you're going to do for the client, what you're going to do at price, if you don't have the retainer, you don't want to get sucked into a path of they think you have just ongoing free legal advice for a whole case. So use
absolutely
you put out to help you with boundaries. All right, lots of great questions coming in. Ooh, this one says, how can you avoid stress in a profession that has constant deadlines? And also, how can solo practitioners think to take a vacation?
Two really good questions. How do we avoid stress in the practice of law? Right? Like the nature, right? The nature of the beast is that we have chosen, for whatever reason, a stressful job. So, when we're deadline oriented, this is where the boundary stuff and having space on your calendar gets really important, because the way we avoid stress is to not make the stress worse. So if we have time to work on things, we're going to be less stressed about those things we have to work on. So that is key. Always have that in the back of your mind. But the other flip side of that is because this stuff is all very stressful, we have to have coping mechanisms. We have to have self-care. That's how you balance the stress that is inherently part of the job of what we do. And I think that that's why we have this big cultural shift and movement right now, trying to remind lawyers of that, acknowledging some of the stresses aren't going to go away. So we have to do something for ourselves to take care of that stress. So looking at those coping mechanisms that are more positive in nature, rather than stuff that doesn't necessarily help you in the long run. And then what was the second question?
How can solo practitioners think to try to take a vacation given deadlines?
Yeah. So this is where we've got to have some hard and firm rules. One thing that really worked for me when I was in private practice for a little while was I tried to always have that set week that was my goal week for vacation. And after a while, it became a little bit easier because I established that routine and I established that habit. And so my colleagues, a lot of the folks that I worked with that were on the opposing side, they got to recognize, we'd look at our calendar and it's funny because people still do this nowadays. They're like, oh, first week of July, I know you're not going to be available. So let's look at that next week, because I've established it as a habit and I have vocalized that. But I have to be cognizant of my calendar to have the ability to actually do that. And I know sometimes we are at the mercy of the court. Right? When the court wants to schedule something, we only have so much flexibility. And so making that best attempt as you can to stick with whatever the time period is that you have. And then remember the harmony aspect of this. I don't think that there's a way to be like, we're going to work at the same pace, like in the weeks leading up to vacation. It's just the nature of the beast. And so allowing yourself some flexibility with how you get things done on the front end and how you get things done on the back end, and sort of being prepared for that can go a long way.
That is very helpful. With regards to minimizing distractions, do you have tips there? I'll start with something I found helpful is to turn off work email notification when they pop up. I will have different blocks of time during the day while I'll check emails, but I found that having the constant ping was just too much. What other thoughts do you have about, besides turning off notifications, maybe using a do not disturb on your phone that can help with minimizing distractions?
Yeah, absolutely. The do not disturb on your phone is a nice thing to use, stopping those push notifications, and not just on, your desktop or your laptop, but also that device as well. You want to have those not come through because that's a big distraction. Having that sign on your door explaining, if you are somebody who has staff that assists you, explain to them what that sign means. When are the times that maybe they're allowed in, but in the meantime, while that sign is up on the door, what can they do to help you? Not that you want to pile stuff on people, but if that is part of what they are there for, utilizing those folks to assist you during that time period that you need to stay focused, I find to be extremely helpful. Setting a timer for me is also helpful. And the reason being is for whatever it is the connection between the dedication of the time that is on the clock that I'm going to be dedicated to. And so I found that helpful from a personal perspective of during that time, I've made that promise that I'm going to ignore everything around me, including, the trash truck that's coming down the street in front of my house because I'm working right by the window. So I'm going to dedicate myself to that time period. So yeah, anything that you can do to remove those things. And sometimes people think minimizing distraction is just those notifications and stuff, but you guys, it's clutter too. Clutter is a distraction. So if you have that in your office, clearing that out can be extremely helpful. And it can also provide an environment that is less stressful. So you want to go back to that stress question, clear out the clutter.
Those are excellent points. To add on to when you were talking about to not have your staff always distract you, but to think too, how can they be helpful? Something I've heard of that's becoming more in popularity is signs, either for on the doors working from home or at the office, that people can have, I'm in deep focus, don't go away. Sometimes people have like the picture of an apple or tomato for the Pomodoro method to say, I'm in deep focus for this. I actually knew of a former coworker who had a cubicle and she would put caution tape when she was in a deep focused zone to say, please no one come in. And then there might be other times to say, knock first, to sort of let people know where you're at would be good. Speaking of that, we have another question about drawing boundaries when you're working from home, living from home. I know you touched on some of this, like you had a great tip about physically shutting down the computer at the end of the day. Something I do at the end of my day is I will take a walk to try to mentally transition. What are some other things people can do when it's very hard that maybe they are physically working at a kitchen table or some space in the house that is hard to disassociate in their mind?
Yeah, that's where mentally putting things in place to establish that this is work time in this space versus this is not work time in this space. So especially if you don't have a dedicated office space, ensuring that you're picking things up at the end of the day in that space, tidying them up. You don't have to necessarily move everything around, but doing a physical action can be extremely helpful. That my recommendation of don't eat in the same place you work can be extremely helpful. If you can get the stuff out of your eyesight, in non-work times, that is also helpful. Simple things like taking breaks and taking lunches when you are working from home is important. It's hard, but it is important for you. So doing those simple acts can actually go a long way. And I love the getting out and taking a walk, or even just getting a breath of fresh air. Can be extremely helpful in making those mental markers for us on what's work time and what's not work time.
I love that thought too you had about to not eat where you work. And then I was just thinking at the table, maybe you could even change to a different side of the table. Say, okay, this is my spot for where I eat lunch. And now I'm 90 degrees and I'm working, and maybe you put the things covered with a blanket or in a basket at the end of the day so that you have, as you were talking, some of that separate as well.
Yeah.
What other tips do you have for email management? I know that that's something that can really bog a lot of people down. Something that I find helpful is like calendar rules. If you can try to, for your listservs or things, have them go in certain folders. What are some tips you found that are particularly helpful for lawyers that may have a hard time, particularly setting boundaries because maybe they're not doing what you're doing, what you suggested of they're having email start their day, it's consuming everything they thought they were going to do, and they're not getting to their pre-established priorities. How would you recommend starting with that to read this?
Yeah, I love that tip, Laura, of utilizing, getting those emails that are cluttered. And they're important, but when you're focused and you're working, sometimes it might seem like clutter within the inbox, things that you can send to those different folders that you can check at certain times of the day. Like, Friday afternoons for me is kind of like professional development time. That's the time I've designated for myself. So catching up on all my listserv stuff, catching up on the journal stuff and all of that, that's my designated time for it. And so, yeah, moving that out of the way when I need to focus on what's going on within the practice or within my job can be extremely important. But I also think establishing certain rules to where you can flag certain senders can be helpful. So depending upon, what you're using for your email inbox, having the ability to have some sort of visual when certain things come in can be helpful, because then I can give it a quick glance and I'm not like going through every single email if I'm looking for a particular one. And, in addition to that, it's really becoming competent with your email system to know what tools you have readily available to you to clean that inbox. And there are some other applications that you can use to assist. It's supposed to declutter things for you. So there are other tools and mechanisms out there. But before you spend the money, because I'm always an advocate of figure out what you have first and utilize what you have before you determine whether or not you need to have any add-ons to help in that regard. And then the other thing that I like to do is a simple thing. I treat emails like letters sometimes. We are not always quick to respond to those letters. And so I think it's just that environment of that instant communication that gets in our mindset. So sometimes I remind myself in a day, I don't have to treat these like instant. I can treat these like letter communications as well. And then my other tip for email to give that cultural shift change is to be a good colleague. So what I like to do is remember, harmony ebbs and flows. There might be nights that I am at like 6 o'clock needing to catch up on email and send out messages. And it's nothing that is like important that other person has to answer in like that evening. But because of culturally how we've operated over the years, it almost sets that expectation for that other person. So if I press send, I try to have a sentence at the top of it at least that says, if you're reading this right now, I don't need a response today. Or better yet, utilizing the ability to schedule for when that email goes out. So if I'm having to get caught up at 6, that email doesn't go out the next day until like 10, because I also don't send emails first thing in the mornings to other people because I want to create that expectation. So that's another thing that I think we can do when we begin talking about how do we start cultural shifts. We've got to play a part in that as well.
Those are excellent tips about letting your colleagues know this isn't a rush, isn't a hurry, schedule sending delay. I love your tip too about treating email more as a letter. It used to be before email, you wouldn't feel compelled to respond to that letter right off. Mm-hmm. And something that might help people as well too is the snooze button that some of the email providers have to say, snooze till tomorrow morning, boomerang if you don't want to deal with it right now, but have it come remind later would be great. Let's see what else we have here. So given your background as an ethical lawyer, what would you suggest are some warning signs that people maybe are falling short on setting boundaries? Like I'll start with something that I think pertains to this question. When people don't get back to their clients, when they're afraid to answer phone calls, what are some other warning signs you see that might mean someone is being overwhelmed, might be headed down some ethical troubles?
Yeah. So, when I would have conversations, and to this day, still have conversations with people about this, I look at one, what's your sense of overwhelm? Are you to the point where you feel like you are constantly putting out so much energy, but you're never getting ahead on things? If that's the case, and the answer to that question is yes, then we got to look at those reasons why. And it could be that you're saying yes to too many things. You're not putting some boundaries in place to give you some time to take some time off. So that's one thing that I always look at is, what is your sense of overwhelm? Do you feel like you are constantly putting energy and you can't get caught up? The other thing is if you find that you feel like you're always playing catch up on things as well, I say, well, let's look at your calendar and let's look at your schedule and see what the issues are there. The other thing is yeah, the stuff like missing deadlines, not returning phone calls. So when we stop doing things, that also tells me that there might be a problem with boundaries. And it could be for a number of different reasons. So we've all probably had that client that eventually we got to the point where you dreaded and you avoided calling that client. And so now maybe you're like, oh, I'm putting this off, I'm putting this off, I'm putting this off as long as I can. And then we start talking about maybe some ethical issues here if we keep putting off, putting off, putting off. I say, why are you putting that off? What happened in that representation and in that relationship to create those thoughts and those feelings about that client? And sometimes it was because we didn't have boundaries in the very beginning with that particular person, and it just created a storm that now all we want to do is avoid.
Those are very good thoughts to think about as well, and warning signs before we start going down that path of avoidance, because that never leads to anything better.
Nope.
So, all right, this is wonderful. We had a lot of questions in the chat. I believe we have gotten to all of them. I want to thank Danielle. This has been a marvelous presentation. You have given us so many good tips in thinking about work-life harmony, realizing it will ebb and flow, and thinking about setting boundaries professionally, personally, things that we can do right off going away, whether learning how to say no, blocking off time. Things have been incredibly helpful with a lot of practical tips. Before I turn it back to you, I just want to note that, again, for those who are looking for the recording of this will be available afterwards, as will PDF of the slides. We are delighted to have Danielle here. Our next webinar for busy lawyers will be in a month on July 14th. We'll have Chris Shattuck talking about low budget tools that you can do for dictation, automation, and other ways to make your practice more efficient. We'll be very excited for that. Danielle, do you have parting thoughts on this issue? And again, thank you so much. This has been absolutely tremendous to have you here. You are a wonderful person, wonderful presenter, and such an important topic that you gave us a lot of tips on.
Well, I want to thank you, and I want to thank the attendees for attending today, because I think the first step in this is there was a reason why you attended today. And so thinking about that reason, and maybe if you can just implement, even if it's just one thing that you learned, I think it can go a long way. We don't have to go 100% on self-care and everything all of the time, even though I know that that's what it feels like, which is why you feel like you can't do it. So taking things a step at a time is my recommendation. And when you start thinking about boundaries, sit down with a pen and paper and ask yourself some questions and write answers to those questions down. Like, what do you want to do with your time? You know, how do you want to communicate? What do you want those boundary markers to be? And give yourself some time to really think about it and put some thought into it. And then the next step is just implementing it.
Those are wonderful parting thoughts, something very good to take away from us. And as you said, thank you so much for everybody that has attended today. We are grateful for your time and hope that you learned a lot. We look forward to having you at future webinars for busy lawyers, and wish you a very good rest of your day and your week. So thank you, Danielle. Thank you, attendees.
Thank you.